Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. Mental curator Johnny Hemberger. First broadcast since my son was born. First radio show broadcast since my son Riker was born. And I am on top of the world. All I want to do every day is get home to see my little baby boy and kiss those cheeks. Get all those smooches in while I can before he's embarrassed of me. So I'm a very happy father, very excited for this lifetime ahead of me to introduce him to all these sorts of geeky things and see what geeky things he gets into, show him my old 286 computer and cassette players and VHS players and nostalgic things, and relish in the new technology with him, see what kind of gaming PC he builds in the future, what kind of virtual reality, all sorts of high technology. You know, I think I've talked about this before on the show. Are any of you listening that are kind of my age or older? I'm 37. Who we went through this era, and depending on how old you are listening, we went through this era from after World War II to the current day to 2020, and there was this kind of magic time. Now, I haven't been around, obviously, since after World War II, but I did grow up in the 80s. I was born in 1983, grew up through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. 2010s until today, 2020. And it was such a magical time to witness the evolution of technology. And I can only imagine it's even more awe-inspiring and incredible if you grew up in the 40s. Let's say you were born in 1940 during World War II, and you started forming memories towards the end of World War II, and television, black and white television, color television, knowing who the first person on your block was to have color television. You had 2 or 3 or 4 channels in your neighborhood. You would watch the announcers sign off at the end of the day, and they would show the test pattern and play the national anthem. They show that test pattern, by the way, not to get too sidetracked. That test pattern was so that you could calibrate your TVs. And it's something that I kind of wish still happened now, but we don't really need to. Our TVs are fairly well calibrated out of the box. But back in the 50s and 60s and so, when you would see the color bars or the black and white patterns, the lines and circles and things like that, you could calibrate your TV and the sharpness and the contrast so that you could see everything. And you would know that your TV was calibrated to your local TV station. So let's say you're watching ABC and you saw the test patterns at the end of the day, April 2nd, 1956, and you got that test pattern there, and you could calibrate your TV so that you can see that the dark is dark, that the dark is dark, and then the lighter darks go through like the color gradient there, and you know that it's all calibrated. Now, for anybody younger listening, we do see that from time to time in video games. When you fire up Half-Life or you fire up tons of different video games, Doom and whatnot, there's a calibration screen that says make sure your monitor is calibrated so that you can barely see the darkest circle or whatever. And that's how you know that your monitor is calibrated for the best experience of gameplay. That's been around since TV was invented, pretty much, with the test patterns. And the tinkerer in me kind of misses that. Like, I kind of wish I could go back in time and see a test pattern and then fiddle with the calibration of my old RCA, round screen model whatever TV with the rabbit ears sticking out the top, try to get that test pattern to look the best on my screen so that I can watch the Ed Sullivan Show in perfect, crisp clarity. So anyways, back to the point I was making here in the first segment. There was this kind of span of technology over some decades since the end of World War II that technology just kept ramping. Moore's Law, the doubling of processing speed, the miniaturization. We went from vacuum tubes to solid-state transistors, and things got smaller. Reel-to-reels became compact cassette players. Those compact cassette players got so small that you could wear them on your hip with the Sony Walkman. And then we went on to CD players and MP3s, and now we're streaming music from Spotify. There was a time, I would say, I'm going to stick to the 80s and 90s to early 2000s, where it was just this non-stop ramp up of technology, and things were wonderful. As far as it was magical, that's a much better way to put it. There was that era where the progress of technology was akin to magic. That's how it felt like to me. So a perfect case in point here, Nintendo. You went from the Nintendo Entertainment System to the Super Nintendo, 8-bit to 16-bit. That jump from 8-bit video games to 16-bit video games was pure magic, was unadulterated sorcery magic. I remember playing Super Mario World and thinking to myself, there is no freaking way video games and graphics can ever get better than this. A few years later, I thought the exact same thing playing Mario 64 on the 64-bit Nintendo 64. There's no way graphics can get better than this. It's 3D, it's open world, there's no freaking way. Then the same thing happened again in 2000, 2001 with the PlayStation 2, and I was looking at playing NHL 2001 on the PlayStation 2, and you see the hockey players' faces thinking, well, there's human beings on my screen. I'm controlling actual human being figures on my screen. There's no way it can get better than this. Now we're talking about ray tracing. Now we're talking about deep fake and AI. It is so lifelike now that we've started to approach this kind of uncanny valley where things get so real that it's no longer enjoyable, that it kind of freaks us out, that it's a harder sell, to get into games and features like that when the artificially created human face is too real. It's a little unsettling, and it's kind of this uncanny valley, they call it, where it's like the adoption of it there's resistance against it because it gets too real. There's a point where it gets too real and too weird and kind of too hard to sell the human brain. But I guess I will finish this thought in the next segment. I was going to comment on, do we still get that same kind of magic today? If you grew up from the end of World War II to today, or you were like me, you grew up through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, is there still any magic left with technology? Let's talk about that more. More coming up here on Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere.
Whoopa Gangnam Style! Gangnam Style! Whoopa Gangnam Style!
Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. Hope you're enjoying this bump music. Hope I decided to keep this bump music and not change it to something else, because that would sound very silly. It's Frog Leap Studios on YouTube, and this is a very metal cover of Gangnam Style by Psy. Remember that? Remember Gangnam Style? So anyways, that's the bump music I hopefully have chosen for today. I'm Johnny Hamburger, your mental curator. You are listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Go to geektherapyradio.com for more information. The very first thing you see when you go to geektherapyradio.com is the contact form. And it sends an email right to me. And I get emails all the time from all over the world even. Hey, Johnny, I busted out my old video game consoles and CRT TV, and I'm really hoping to share it with my kids. I think it was Kenzo from the Netherlands who reached out to me about that. And that just brightens my day. It's awesome to hear your geek things from around the world. And if you're just listening in Houston, my local Houstonians geek things. I grew up in Houston. I am trying to be someone. I'm from this town. I came here in 1989. So let me know what your geek thing is here if you live around Houston. So speaking of being here since 1989, in the previous segment, I left it with the question, is technology still magical to you? So in the previous segment, I was mentioning that for those of us who grew up post-World War II, maybe you're an older demographic than me, and you remember growing up through the late 40s and 50s and 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up until today, and you remember how quickly technology advanced and how magical it was. In my use case scenario as a 37-year-old, I vividly remember the magic of going from 8-bit video games to 16-bit video games to 32-bit to 64-bit to 128, 256, 356, everything 512. You know, where are we at officially with GPUs? We're not even really counting anymore. I think my graphics card in my computer at home is 384-bit. It doesn't really matter. Like after PlayStation 2, the bit wars kind of stopped. It just started running away so fast and getting so real that it was no longer it is something 128 bits or 256 bits or whatever. So going back to my personal Magic era, 1989, moving to Houston. We were still rocking the Nintendo Entertainment System. 8-bit video games were still all we had, basically. I mean, yes, the Sega Genesis came out, I think, in 1988 and 1889, 16-bit. I didn't have one. I had never seen one out in the wild at that age. Any way you slice it, the Nintendo Entertainment System, the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System, was the most popular system at the time. That's what most people were familiar with. So going from 8-bit to 16-bit in 1991 with the Super Nintendo, it was all magical. And that's just video game systems. I'm not even talking about, or I haven't mentioned yet, on the personal computer side of things. Our first computer was, I want to say, a Packard Bell. Was it a 386 or a 486? I believe it was a 486. It could do video playback. It had MMX technology. It was a multimedia computer. It had a CD-ROM, a cartridge style CD-ROM drive, a 1X CD-ROM drive, and it was pure magic going from the Nintendo 8-bit Nintendo to this 486 computer and seeing the graphics and the multimedia capable with a 486 computer. And it was also magical going from Windows 3.1 to Windows 95. And then we had to get another computer, obviously, to get Windows 98 to run properly. And it was a magical time going from Windows 3.1. I remember my Jurassic Park screensavers on there. Going to Windows 95, hounding my dad. Dad, you have to get Windows 95. Oh my gosh. How old was I? 11 years old, probably at this point. But it was so magical. Has technology lost that magic? Now, I know that technology nowadays is so incomparably further ahead and further advanced than what it was when I was a little boy in the late 80s and early 90s. I know that. I'm thinking of our ultra-powerful tablets, our iPads, my virtual reality headset, my Oculus VR headset. I'm thinking about deepfake and AI and the cloud and everything and online cloud gaming and game streaming. You know, NVIDIA GeForce now, you don't even have to have a powerful console on your end. You just basically dial up with high-speed internet, either cable or fiber optic or whatever you have. High-speed internet. We're very far away from dial-up now, and you can just play games from a local server. AAA titles, perfect graphics, just over your internet connection. And that's all amazing, don't get me wrong. But is there any magic? Are you impressed by anything? The same way you were impressed going from the NES to the Super Nintendo. Going from a 486 computer to a Pentium. Going from an abacus to pen and paper to an abacus, or an abacus to a calculator. It was magical. Have we lost that? So I'll give a perfect example of this. I can't remember the last time technology was magic for me. I don't remember the last time I truly spazzed out and geeked out over like a new console. And a good example of this is PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. It's cool, but it's not magic. I am not pulling my hair out and freaking out at the idea of getting a PlayStation 5 the same way that I was freaking out about getting a Super Nintendo in 1992 is when I finally got the Super Nintendo. So is that partly, I know it is partly because I was a kid back then. I know partly it's because we were kids back then at that time of technology. But is that the only explanation for it? I don't think so. I think there were plenty of adults out there who were just constantly, it felt like they were breathless with how fast technology has advanced. And it was magic. Wow, I can write emails from my TV. What was it? Web TV? What was that thing? My great-grandmother used it back in the day. Has technology just has the advance of technology, modern advance of technology, year to year been magical? Is the iPhone 12 going to be an actual jaw-dropping, almost makes you want to cry improvement over the iPhone 11? Heck freaking no. I'd say probably the last, major leap I made in technology was my virtual reality headset, and I think I got that in like 2017 or 2018. And it was cool, but it wasn't magic to me. It just seemed logical, if that makes sense. When they come out with the latest and greatest things, it's no longer magical, it's logical. Well, that makes sense. The processor's a little faster. Well, that makes sense. It's a higher resolution screen. Well, that makes sense. It's higher refresh rate. But it's not like having a veil lifted from your eyes. And that's what technology felt like growing up. I can't imagine what it would be like to have grown up through the late 40s and early 50s and watched television become colorized and watch computers go from the size of a house, to fitting on your desk. That had to feel like magic, no matter how old you were. If you were a 45-year-old man or a woman in the late 1970s or through the 1970s, and you saw computers go from the size of a refrigerator or the size of a room to a Commodore 64 or a VIC-20 or whatever, TRS-80, that fits on your desk, and you were 45 years old at the time, that still had to be magic. Had to be magic. We weren't, as a society, and through no fault of our own, we were experiencing it along with the rest of the world and the rest of humanity. We weren't as scientifically versed back then. We weren't as technologically versed back then. The average consumer wasn't. Now the average consumer is so incredibly up-to-date and smart and knowledgeable about all facets of technology. Even someone who thinks they don't know how to use a computer, they don't know how to send email or whatever, they don't know the Google, they are so much more technologically versed than the general public in the late 1970s, for instance. And maybe it was that lack of knowledge that just made things so magical. That's probably part of it. Anyways, let's talk about this a little bit more. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, geektherapyradio.com for more information and backlog of podcasts, and there's some merch on there too. I don't make much, if any, money off the merch, but if you want to buy some stickers and slap it off, slap it on your bumper or slap it on your laptop, they're there. Geek Therapy Radio stickers. I got to work on getting more merch. It's been tough to get wearables and apparel, what with the pandemic and all, and supply chains and whatever, but soon I will have apparel. I would love to have more Geek Therapy Radio t-shirts. Right now I only have 2 Geek Therapy Radio t-shirts, one for me, one for my wife. And I wore it to, this is going to make me sad. I wore it to Comic Palooza, which is our local Comic-Con here in Houston. And that was actually last winter of 2019, or was it January or February of 2020? I forget exactly off the top of my head. It was cold. And anyways, I wore my Geek Therapy Radio t-shirt to that convention. And I actually did an interview or two just with my phone. I interviewed, what was the group? It was the local Lego community. Brick Club of Houston, something like that. You go back in the archives and type in like Brick Club or Lego or whatever, and you can find the interview I recorded right on the floor of Comic Palooza. So anyways, I've got 2 t-shirts right now. I need to make more. I need to make them offered to you. Let me know. You can email me, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com, or just go to geektherapyradio.com and let me know. Would you be interested in t-shirts? anything I can sell to you if you're interested and you want to and support Geek Therapy Radio, it would help me buy diapers for Riker. And that's the name of the game now, buddy. I'm a dad. Got to be thinking about my son first. Riker comes first. In all decision making, it's going to be my son first. So anyways, geektherapyradio.com. Let's get back on track here. Let me know through those outlets, geektherapyradio.com, or email me, whatever. Is there any technology that's still magical to you? I think this sentiment of technology being magical plays a lot into our modern nostalgia. And this is a perfect segue into what I really wanted to talk about in this show before I get so famously Geek Therapy Radio sidetracked. I think a lot of our vintage retro tech nostalgia comes from just that feeling. We remember when the advancement of technology was magical. So here's what I've been geeking out about recently over the past couple days. And the thing is, you never know what's going to catch you. That's kind of one of the beautiful things about being a geek, and we're all geeks about something. You never know what's going to catch you. I had been going through not a doldrum over the past few weeks. I was focused on the birth of my son. That is obviously going to be my biggest geek thing in life now, is my son. But technologically speaking, and kind of vintage and nostalgia speaking, there really wasn't anything, that I was currently tinkering with. I'm always tinkering with something. There's just nothing really that I was tinkering with over the past few weeks. So fast forward a little bit. My in-laws have been here for the past week or so, and they have been an amazing help, and I hope they would just kind of move in with us, because coming home to an awesome dinner every night has been amazing, and they've been huge helps with Riker and allowing Sarah and I to sleep and focus and get adjusted to having an infant. We're first-time parents. So one of the things they brought with them, the Poindexters, that's their last name. I'm not calling them Poindexters. Their last name is Poindexter. They brought a bunch of VHS tapes. And it dawned on me, because I hadn't thought about it. I don't have a VHS player. I don't have a VCR. So I sought to remedy that. I said, well, maybe I can hop onto eBay and maybe we can get a VCR here before you leave, in a few days. So I hopped onto eBay and I got a Sony VCR. I mentioned this a little bit in the previous podcast, but that's what I've been kind of geeking out about right now. And I got bit by this bug, and I've been going down these rabbit trails, and I'm going deep into VHS technology and video cassette technology. So high 8mm cameras, VCRs, VHS-C, all that stuff. And so now it's kind of triggered this. It's kind of it reminded me of something, and I mentioned this in the previous podcast. It reminded me that recording studios very often would provide audio masters on VHS tape, because hi-fi VHS, there's a difference there, because hi-fi VHS tapes have an amazing signal-to-noise ratio. It's like 90 dB signal-to-noise ratio, and a full frequency spectrum of 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And that's analog tape. It's amazing, pristine audio quality that you can get with hi-fi VHS tapes. And of course, knowing me and my love and affinity for analog recording formats, I had completely forgot about using VHS just for audio. Basically using a VHS player, a VCR, like a reel-to-reel. And one of the beautiful bonuses to going down this rabbit trail is that I don't know last time you priced reel-to-reels, they're extremely expensive. Hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for a good reel-to-reel. It's unobtainium for a lot of geeks out there who just can't justify dropping $700, $800, $1,200, $1,500, $2,000 on a quarter-inch or half-inch or 1-inch reel-to-reel player recorder. But a VCR can kind of fill that void for cheap. Because it's no surprise. I'm not saying this with any tinge of like, well, surprisingly, no one cares about VCRs anymore. No, it's the truth. No one cares about VCRs anymore. Which is, if you are a geek like me about this kind of analog recording stuff, the fact that nobody cares about VCRs anymore means that you can get VCRs for cheap. And when I say nobody, I mean the general public. The average person off the street, you're going to ask, are you still using a VCR regularly? No. What? Netflix, bro. Netflix. So all I'm saying is you can go on eBay and Craigslist, or maybe just find one in a closet somewhere. A family member might have one. You can find a VCR for cheap, and you can tinker with it to your heart's content. So I purchased a VCR. It cost $60, and it's a Sony NVL 700 or 77, whatever. It's kind of a run of the mill early 2000s VCR, and that's kind of early 2000s for VCR is not the sweet spot. Like with any analog recording technology, the sweet spot really is the late 80s to mid 1990s, and VCRs are no different in that regard. 2002, DVDs were already here. So it's just like cassette players. They got really cheap and stupid and chintzy and Chinese and garbage. So by the early 2000s, this same thing was happening with VCRs. Now, the VCR I got, it's not a terrible VCR. I'm just saying that it's not at like a 1994 Sony prosumer grade VCR that cost $2,000 back in the day, or that costs, $500 on eBay now. Nope, I just got a general use Sony, good brand VCR for $60. There were cheaper VCRs on eBay, but I didn't want to go the cheapest. I said I want to get something that's reasonable quality. It doesn't have to be the best VCR that there ever was. Just kind of serve my purpose, which is to back up these videos that my wife's parents have left. I want to digitize them and then have some fun tinkering with recording audio to them, like treating it like just an audio cassette tape. The caveat here is that since it is kind of a lower end entry level VCR from the year 2002, there's not much control I have over the audio that's going onto the tape. So there's no individual level controls for the audio. There's no sort of bypassing the automatic gain control. Like there's no settings anywhere in there for manually adjusting the audio levels going to tape. So the fact that there aren't any controls for that tells me that of course there's going to be an AGC circuit, automatic gain control circuit, just by default on all the time. And there's no VU meters on the display. So when I start to tinker with this, using it in place of a reel-to-reel, dumping vinyl records onto the VHS tape, taking FLAC files and uncompressed WAV files, 24-bit, 192 WAV files, and putting them on, start dabbling with a VHS tape, I'm going to have to do a whole lot of tinkering with my ear and going in on and off the tape into my audio workstation and my software to analyze the distortion and frequency response and find kind of the best levels to put to the tape, because I won't get any sort of visual or audio feedback from the tape in real time. There's no audio monitoring section to this VCR. It was never designed for that. I can't fault the VCR for that. It's just going to take a lot of tinkering. But that's got me on this rabbit trail of going on eBay and looking for VCRs that can do those things. And it kind of sucks for one reason that I'll get into when we come back from the break. GeekTherapyRadio.com. Visit GeekTherapyRadio.com for more information about Geek Therapy Radio and to contact me directly. Before I sell you anything, it's just a contact form. Hey, what are you geek about? Let me know. That's on GeekTherapyRadio.com. Make sure to get Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast player. Just search for Geek Therapy Radio podcast. Look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and that's me. We'll be right back.
Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style.
Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. In the previous segment, I was talking about VCRs, and I'm going down this rabbit trail of eBay and looking for VCRs. I bought a $60 VCR off of eBay, and it's not a bad VCR, but it doesn't have the manual and fine controls and adjustments that I would like for relegating this VCR to audio playback duty, audio recording and playback duty. Basically, I want to use the VCR. Sorry if I'm talking real loud. I'm just getting you real fast. I'm just getting you caught back at a speed. I want to use my VCR as a reel-to-reel player in place of a reel-to-reel. Because VCRs, if you're just joining Geek Therapy Radio, Hi-Fi VHS has an amazing frequency response and signal-to-noise ratio. It's like 90. In fact, on the consumer end of the spectrum, the only thing better than VHS hi-fi stereo sound in the 90s were CDs. And it was so close. When you're talking about a signal-to-noise ratio and or a dynamic range of 90 decibels, that is very darn near close to what CDs could produce. Technically, CDs could get up to, well, no, I'll take that back. I think CDs were 96 dB. There's an equation here, and I don't feel like doing the math right now off the top of my head, but I think it's 96 dB of dynamic range on a CD. And VHS Hi-Fi had 90 dB of dynamic range and the same 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz frequency response. The only thing better than VHS Hi-Fi stereo sound in the 90s was a compact disc, and they were so close, it almost makes no difference. The VCR, though, the VHS Hi-Fi, had the benefit of being truly analog. It's recorded to the tape differently. As far as hi-fi stereo sound is concerned with the VHS tape, VHS tapes did have a linear audio track on the top or bottom of the tape that was recorded the same way a cassette was. The audio just recorded linearly versus helically. The way that VCRs work is it kind of took all the information, instead of running it linear down the length of the tape, it kind of did diagonal cross sections. In the way the head of the VCR spins, it reads these diagonal cross sections. So basically, you cram a whole lot more data, or not data. That's incorrect. A whole lot more program material onto the same length of tape when you line it all up. When you line them up horizontally or on a slant, almost not quite vertical, and that's why you were able to get so much more bandwidth and frequency response and dynamic range out of audio on a VHS tape, because it was recorded that way. It also has to do with carrier waves, just like FM radio frequency modulation. There's a carrier wave for the video signal and a carrier wave for the audio signal, and that's how it worked. Basically, the carrier wave for the audio was spliced between the carrier wave for the video, so as it goes across the playback head, it's constantly pulling the video carrier wave and the audio carrier wave, and through fancy electronics, it's all split out. VCRs are sorcery. Go on YouTube if you're now curious about the way VCRs work. It's crazy what they were able to achieve with magnetic tape. VCR was pretty much effectively the pinnacle of that technology. Yeah, you can say high 8 and digital DAT tapes and things like that. Well, that's digital. I'm not talking about digital. I'm not even talking about high 8. I'm talking about just the way that the information was stored on the tape, and the way the heads work diagonally and helically. And I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it's sorcery. And carrier waves for the audio, carrier waves for the video. It's magic. So anyways, VCRs, VHS tapes, hi-fi VHS tapes have awesome audio quality. Sorry, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself in my brain. So the reason why this recent hunt on eBay for a more robust prosumer VHS player, VCR, is kind of a negative is that I just had my baby. And I would just had any dads and parents, when you have a baby, you have a real world conversation. The parents have a real world conversation, and basically it boils down to, okay, we got a baby now. We have to just pay closer attention to spending. Be more careful about where our money's going. Just be, no impulse purchases. Just kind of get that kind of under control and make sure, not that it was really a problem before, but not to be in denial about anything. Just the finances are important. So the fact that I'm getting bit by this VCR hi-fi bug, and I want to get a VCR that has manual controls for the audio and all that stuff, manual level controls and monitoring and whatever. It's like, gosh, it comes on the heels of that financial conversation. I'm looking on eBay for a prosumer grade hi-fi VHS player with all the manual controls in the world, or maybe even a VTR, and I'm looking at them and they're $150, $200, $300 for a high-end VCR with all the controls I want. It's like, dag nabbit. Can't justify it. Can't justify it. So I'm looking at something right now as I'm recording the show. This is a High 8 cassette recorder, and it's not a High 8 Handycam. It's not a High 8 camera video recorder. It's just a High 8 deck. It looks just like a VCR. It sits on your component rack, and it just, instead of a VHS tape, you're using 8mm tapes. And I'm looking at this thing. It's the Sony EV-S3000. And it has all the individual controls for your audio monitoring and how you're laying audio down to the tape. And it records in PCM, which, by the way, PCM for High 8, when it says digital audio recording for High 8 cameras, digital audio, that's 16-bit 32 kilohertz. So you're only going to be getting up to about 16K. The frequency response is from 20 hertz to 16,000 hertz, which, don't get me wrong, for the application, recording family home videos and PCM audio from 20 to 16 kilohertz is perfectly fine. I mean, that sounds like, a decent MP3, arguably. I'm not interested in the PCM aspect of it. I'm interested in recording the hi-fi audio tracks to the High 8. But doesn't matter. I'm looking at this thing. It's $199. And as much as I want it, I can't, in my right mind, justify it at the moment. But I'll tell you what. To swing it all back around here regarding me geeking out about VCRs right now, and possibly sparking some of you listening to geek out about VCRs now that you can know that they can be used for more than just video recording. You can use them in place of a reel-to-reel. Something to keep in mind, though, is just because you see it for $200 on eBay, US dollars, or $500 or $1,000, it's kind of like vintage computers. Yes, you can go on eBay and look for an old 286. It'll cost you a few $100s. But you can also just keep your feelers out among your friends and family. There are other places to look for, and that sometimes you get lucky and you'll find an aunt or an uncle or a grandma or something that actually has a really killer VCR, and it just collects dust, and they'll just give it to you, knowing they'll be weirded out. Why are you freaking out about a VCR from 1986? Don't worry about it, Grandma. So you can find these things just because they're a few $100s on eBay. If you're patient and keep your ears open and your feelers, and your ear down to the tracks, you can find these things in somebody's closet. You might sound weird. By the time we're going to people's houses again, the pandemic lifts and we're going to people's houses. Hey, do you have like an old VCR or something I can look at? You'll be surprised what you find like that. I know LGR does his thrift episodes where he goes thrifting through the Goodwill and he finds really cool finds at the Goodwill. That's one thing you can do too. Goodwill is starting to get hip to the prices of vintage gear though. So it's not like you're going to get a $600 VCR for $20 at Goodwill anymore. I mean, you can, but they're getting more wise to it. But you don't have to do that. Just start with your friends and family. Hey, dude, you got a VCR laying around? Yeah, man, here's this is actually a really good VCR. So there are other ways to fill your geek hobbies. Thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. You are worthy of love. You are also worthy of giving love and receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-respect. Thank you so much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. I'll talk to you next time. If you run a business and you'd like to talk about sponsoring Geek Therapy Radio, just get at me, geektherapyradio.com, and let's talk some shop.